And before I want to toss it to you as sort of kind of some of the key things that you observe in that story.
Sure. Right.
But one of the things I like to that really got me engaged with this kind of thinking in terms of human development is in gifted education and gifted research, we talk about what's giftedness as what we call developmental asynchrony.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this term that's used to say that an individual is somehow not in the same place developmentally as their age peers. Usually we're talking about age peers, right? And that therefore, like, they're in the right place in some ways, but they're in a different place. And that giftedness is just one direction of asynchrony, where it's the ability far outstrips our expectations of a kid this age.
Right.
Or their ability is not near what we expect for a kid this age, and what they're able to do and what they're able to accomplish. And so, and one of the things as a, that I discovered as a researcher and as an individual, and I preface, this is where we get into the territory, what we call twice exceptionality, where we have an exception on one end and an exception on the other.
Right.
And that these things can and do co-occur.
Sure.
So what would be your thoughts on, like, what are the key things that you would, I feel like I've tried to pick out sort of the most important observations and kind of highlight them.
I mean, that's, to me, it's one of the problems really with education in a group setting to begin with. We have it's less expensive to certainly to educate individuals as part of a group and so on. We have group norms and expectancies and so on. When a person doesn't fit that, and so on, there's be problems. And I go back to like the place like Summerhill, the English school, which dealt with trying to look at the individual first. Let's start with the individual and so on, what their needs are, what their interests are, and so on. Let that direct really the curriculum, rather the other way around, trying to impose a curriculum upon a person, expecting to meet these expectancies and so on. No, I think a lot has to do with really how we structure education. And I think that if we focus more upon the individual, a lot of these problems that Nora's experiencing wouldn't exist because we focus on her needs and how she interacts with others and so on. And it's unique and it's something that's part of her. It's not something imposed on her from in terms of standards or expectancies and all these things we write up at the state level in terms of what are the norms at a particular age level. Oftentimes it's very counterproductive for students like Nora.
Absolutely. And anyone who's familiar with the Let's Talk Ed research channel, this is definitely things that I talk about a lot. And like, and I'm just going to give a quick side rant. I would get rid of the age grade system, first grade, second grade, third grade, overnight. I would get rid of it. We might still group sort of larger sections of ages, but you would enter school when you're ready. You would exit school when you're ready.
Right.
Or that particular area of school. And that, and I feel like that a lot of that would help us sort of create a less stigmatized, less problematic environment,
right,
in which we can account for a wider range of ability without having the sense of saying, well, this kid is doing 7th grade math when they're in 5th grade, which informs our expectations of that kid.
That's right.
Versus, oh, that kid's taking that particular math class because that's the level that they're at. And they're with, kids who are within 3 years of the same age who are similarly placed.
Right.
In terms, and we actually, there's a study on ability grouping that shows 100 years of research on ability grouping shows that generally it is more beneficial and rarely in and of itself harmful. It's that the structures in which that we have around it create issues of perceptions of value over one group or another. It's not that grouping kids who have a lower range of ability than many of their age peers is intrinsically bad for them. It's the judgment that is seen for a kid to be, quote unquote, behind.
Right, exactly. And that's a lot of the
Um,
problem, the concept of being behind, not fitting a norm and so on, rather than looking at the individual, because people can make great leaps if they're interested. A lot of it has to do with
yeah,
interest. The person
yeah.
focuses their interest, and they can make tremendous leaps and so on. And it may not occur linearly. It might occur really in ways which are totally nonlinear. I think I should respect the nonlinearity really of development for many individuals.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of getting back into the case study, in this case, like one of the things that I would first suggest with Nora is like, well, has she had a full evaluation? Because I have seen kids like Nora who've been privileged enough even to be identified for giftedness because of their hypercalcula, hyperlexia, etc., and end up in like gifted classes, which is actually enormously helpful to them because we're now playing to their strengths. But then they still are struggling with sort of, group, like you said, group learning processes
Right,
because no one has identified previously that there's a particular deficit in processing speed, deficit in impulse control, deficit
right,
in emotional control, etc. And we don't want to have a deficit mindset, but in terms of like trying to frame it within like what we expect and where we would want to hopefully help that child be. And this is where I really love Vygotsky, because his
yeah,
approach is that there's the more knowledgeable other
mhm,
that can scaffold for just about anything,
right,
and that we want to be in the zone of proximal development,
right,
both along these areas of like even biologically mediated processing. Like if we've got a neurological difference, such as, and I would say Nora fits the model of ADHD.
mhm,
Um, and that what we find though is that when kids are identified and then they get accommodations for ADHD, where they're allowed to have additional processing time and where they're allowed movement breaks, or where they're allowed to use a standing desk, or where they're allowed to um, kind of pursue a particular interest at length with fewer interruptions. Sometimes that's one of the big things that I think a lot of people don't realize about ADHD. It also comes with hyper focusing, right?
right,
And that's why, part of why I picked out that sitting down with the book and then being like,
right,
hey, we're going
exactly,
to do this. Well, but there's this hyper fixation and this hyper focus, which isn't necessarily, which when that person is an adult, let's say a graduate student, we're like, yes, yes, absolutely.
right,
And I would argue that's one of the reasons that, when you think of people who've made like massive, you know, um, changes in society because of their ideas and the things they put forward, your Albert Einsteins, your Martin Luther Kings, your Isaac Newtons, your Maya Angelou's, all these people who've made massive input, and I don't have data on Maya Angelou. I just wanted to pick her because I love her. But like many of those people we find were on the spectrum or had some sort of neurological diversity or
right,
suffered from
sure,
mood disorders that
right,
oftentimes are related to
exactly,
sort of this developmental asymmetry. For example, we know that Martin Luther King suffered from anxiety and depression in massive ways, but was gifted. He graduated early,
mhm,
but he still struggled, and his work struggled at times because of massive issues with depression. And he was thankfully had support and a support network around him that made it possible for him to continue to develop.
right, yeah, exactly. And I had a friend of mine, actually a professor, Paul Hans Schieser, who went to the same school, not the same time as Albert Einstein. And he talked to some of the teachers who actually had taught Einstein. And so the Einstein that was very poor in mathematics. He was actually considered a slow learner. He didn't
Yeah,
fit
no,
in.
we know he had a slow processing, and it's really funny.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
The autism spectrum, the autism
yeah,
community wants to claim him, and then the dyslexic community wants to claim him.
right. Exactly. Exactly.
you know?
But it's different. And let them find their way. And it's a lot to
Yeah.
do with, don't judge people. Get them time to develop, let them trying to find themselves and so on. I think that the self-valuing thing is the key thing.
Yeah.
When we compare students to norms, oftentimes what we're doing is you're destroying their self-valuing. What we need is encourage students, make them value themselves, let them
Yeah.
find their way. Or in terms of
Yeah.
like in terms of the table setting suggestion you're talking about. Well, why don't you start off with, instead of start setting the table, bring your child a book on table setting. Let her read that
Yeah, maybe.
and talk about how we
know?
apply this in real life,
Right?
something like that.
Right. And then, or if you've got a kid who's like a
Yeah,
consummate drawer, like then it's like, well, can you draw what the table needs to look like?
right. Yeah,
And then
exactly.
that's going to help them know how to set the table,
That's right. Yeah,
and
exactly.
I really want to bring in something that comes into the S factor um modality. And I love your term habituated intention. Um because one of the key things that I see as teachers is that there is this conception that it's our job to tell kids what they should know,
Right.
as opposed to, and that it what become I'm not going to say as opposed to, I would say, and that's, we place secondary the we just assume you're going to pick up how to know those things or
Right.
how to find those things, and we're just going to assume that because we know that this is valuable, that kids will just understand the why, right? The why it's valuable. And as a teacher, I completely flip that on its head. I try to do that all the time. In fact, I will invite students and encourage them. I'm like, if this doesn't, if anything that I give you doesn't seem valuable to you, then why would I want you to waste your time doing something that's not valuable to you? So, but
Right.
I then say, but I want you to have the age. I want you to be able to know that you can ask me and that we can have a conversation and at least give me the opportunity to help you understand why this is valuable.
Right.
Right. And that's hard and it takes time. And I'm very fortunate because a lot of the situations in which I teach, I'm in an enrichment space and I have the time. I don't have to be meeting a pacing guide, etc. And I will recognize that, but one of the key things that I hear when you say habituated intention is the idea of agency.
Right.
And the idea of empowerment and what I would say bell hooks would say is liberatory education. And that I think that habituated intention is this idea of building a sense of identity and self that is going to help someone like Nora,
right, exactly,
to feel that she actually has skin in the game, that she has ownership.
exactly. That's a key thing.
To, in doing so, that one of the things we have to break for her is this perfectionism, and I think there is that aspect of perfectionism in which she won't do something because she starts from the assumption that she's not going to do it right.
Right.